in a world beforehand, in the Adam world, God tested all of the souls, and he sets this great fire, and all of the souls of the prophets and the messengers and the people are commanded to go into the fire. And the ones that respond, there was three groups of people: a group of people that jumped in the fire, a group of people that didn't jump in the fire, and a group of people that were hesitant and then they jumped in the fire.
Okay.
So the narration states that the first ones that jumped without fear or hesitation into the fire were the prophets and the messengers and the righteous ones, right? Okay. And the ones that hesitated, or the rest of the believers, and the people that didn't go in, are the ones that ended up being non-believers in this world. All right, so now let's rewind all the way back, and we'll talk later about why it is that Muslims believe that Muhammad and his family are deserving of this inherent infallibility. But let's go back and prove everything that we've talked about so far, and highlight and look at through the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran at the different types of mistakes that the prophets and messengers were listed as having committed.
Okay, sure.
Do you want to start off? Let's start with Genesis.
Okay. I mean, we spoke about it in the previous episode that basically our whole story as humanity began with a mistake. And that mistake was committed by Adam. Adam transgressed the covenant with God. He ate from the tree. He only had one thing that he was supposed to not do, and that was eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he did it. And for that reason, he was expelled from the Garden of Eden. But
he was not deleted as a prophet.
He was recorded, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So why didn't he lose his job as a prophet? Now this is where we need to zoom in. We've mentioned the mistake before, but now we need to zoom in and figure this out. What did Adam do? Adam didn't lose his rank as a prophet, even though there are prophets who disobeyed God and they fell and they lost their rank of prophethood. And one of the prime examples of that is a prophet whose name is Bel'am bin Baura, right, in Arabic, or Bel'am son of Beor in English. Mm-hmm. And the narrations of the Jews state very clearly that Bel'am was to the non-Hebrews, he was to the Gentiles, a prophet that was at the same rank as Moses. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he was like the Ulil Azm for the non-Hebrews. I mean, he didn't come with his own jurisprudence. He was still teaching the same jurisprudence as Noah. Mm-hmm. But he was that high, and he could see everything underneath the throne. And because of his mistake of having envy against Moses, he loses his rank and he becomes deleted, and he's no longer a prophet or messenger, and the knowledge is stripped from him, prophethood is stripped from him, and he goes to hellfire in the end. So here is something important. And I'm highlighting it at the beginning as we're speaking about Genesis because of this idea of, can a prophet lose his rank or not? And we find that clearly he can, and a prophet can go to hellfire. And that's what happened in the case of Bel'am. So now when we talk about Adam, why was Adam not sent to hellfire? Why was he forgiven? Why was he reinstated as a prophet? And here we find the difference. Okay. So Adam, when he ate from the tree, he did a great injustice, but he only did it to himself.
Okay, yes.
He misguided his own self. Yeah. Okay, but he didn't misguide the creation of God. Yeah. None of the angels ate from the tree with Adam. Right. It was only Adam and his own self, which is his wife. Him and his wife, they're the ones that transgress, and it's Adam in particular who eats from the tree, right?
Okay, yeah.
As to where Bel'am, when he decided to go out and make call down the curse of God against Moses. He's engaging in a public feud with another prophet.
That's
okay. And his followers now are taking Moses as an enemy, right?
Okay.
And so he's misguiding people.
Yeah. I mean, what a huge conflict for people. Everyone who was following Bel'am then would be completely misguided.
Yeah. And here then is where we get to know the thin line that God has between, so God is able then to forgive any of the mistakes that a prophet or messenger commits, so long as it's not misguiding other people. If it's mistakes that apply to their own selves, it's only them harming their own rank. It's only them that are going down in degree. It's only them that are basically showing that they have not enough faith or certitude. God can forgive that, because that's a sin between them and God. As to where the mistakes or the sins that have to do with publicly misguiding people, God does not let that go. And that's when the person can no longer be fit to be a messenger or a prophet, because they're not carrying out God's will.
Okay. That's the red line, I guess.
Okay. Do you agree, though?
Yeah, okay. I can see that that's the distinction between these two things, for sure. Yeah.
All right. So Adam, he commits that mistake. He breaks the covenant, but it's only him that's breaking it. And he repents, doesn't misguide anybody, is forgiven. Mm-hmm. But we see here a prophet that can make a mistake. And this mistake is extremely prominent in the Torah and in the Bible, and also in the in Islam. Mm-hmm. And I think in Judaism and Christianity, they don't really even consider Adam to be a prophet. It's more in Islam, so that's why Jews and Christians are more laid back about Adam committing this sin, because they consider him to be just the father of humanity. Yeah. As to where Muslims, no, he's an infallible prophet.
Yeah. I found it interesting to learn. Obviously from my background, I never grew up learning that Adam was a prophet. But when I read what was said about him in the Quran, it's very clear that God actually appointed him as the first representative on earth, as his successor on earth. And I do find that the way that he's presented in the Torah, in the Bible, it does reflect that, as you said, God taught him the names of all things. God favored him. God was walking with him. God was communicating with him. So it is clear that he did play that role. But yeah, it's something that's sort of missed in the history.
Okay, so what about another prophet like Noah? Did he commit any mistakes in the Torah, Bible, and Quran?
I think I would have to ask you what qualifies as a mistake. I mean, he's talked about in a way that could be described as imperfect in the Bible. It's said that he was intoxicated in a tent, and that his son came in and discovered his father's nakedness. If the story would be considered a mistake.
So for sure, for Jews and for Christians, this is definitely one of the highlights of one of the mistakes that Noah did, and that is that he loved alcohol, and he became extremely drunk one day. And you can tell the rest of the story.
Just that he was intoxicated. He was passed out, unconscious in his tent. And it's said that his son entered upon him, and then he left, and he was telling his brothers that he discovered his father's nakedness, and that's what happened. And the other brothers were, of course, trying to cover that.
So in Judaism and Christianity, the drunkenness of Noah. In Islam and the Quran, we don't find this story of the drunkenness of Noah, and you find also that the Muslims would...
They take issue with it, right?
Yeah, they take issue with it, and they would actually, because they have this idea, this belief that there are corruptions in the Torah and in the Bible.
Yeah, this is one of them that they believe.
Yeah, so they automatically dismiss this, and they say Muhammad said alcohol is haram, so it had to be haram for all prophets and messengers, and none of the prophets and messengers would have went against the Sharia of Muhammad, and this had to be the way that it always was, and therefore this must be one of the corruptions there. But regardless, because we'll talk about this later, this idea of alcohol, whether it's forbidden or not forbidden, and its role in the history of humanity in a future episode. But right now, let's talk about whether or not Islam and the Quran highlights a mistake of Noah, or is Noah without mistake in the Quran. And we find that Noah does not escape from being highlighted as a person who commits a mistake. In fact, there's the story that takes place where Noah, the ark is about to take off.
Yeah.
His family, he wants them to be on the ark. His son refuses to get on the ark. His son takes refuge, on this tall mountain. And Noah is questioning God, and he asks him, he says, God, you promised me that my family would be saved. So he's questioning his prophecy that he got.
Okay, yeah.
He says, what about my son? He's from my family. And then God chastises Noah and says, Noah, he's not from your family. I'm warning you lest you be from the ignorant ones. So basically, God's telling Noah, don't question my judgment, don't question my prophecy, and don't doubt. If you continue with this crying and questioning and wondering about your son, you're going to actually be from the ignorant people, and I don't have any prophets that are ignorant, so don't lose your rank.
Wow. Yeah, that's, for sure, that is a clear mistake, and God is making it clear in the way that he speaks to him. So, yeah. So then we have Noah, who's a covenant prophet, one of the greatest of prophets.
And we find that both Jesus and Muhammad, they never committed the mistake of Adam. So Jesus and Muhammad, and we're going to use those two because for Christians and for Muslims, they have inherent infallibility. So we find that indeed, Jesus and Muhammad, they never commit the mistake of Adam, where they go against a direct commandment that God has given, ever. This never happens with them. And it also never happens with them that they are questioning a prophecy of God's, like a God telling them, that someone is they don't go back and say, hey, why is this person not saved, or something in such a direct manner like Noah does, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So then let's move on to Abraham. What's some of is Abraham mentioned for having any mistakes?
Abraham. I'm thinking.
So in Judaism and Christianity, Abraham is highlighted for having committed a big mistake, and that's he lied. Okay, and he lies. Yes, he lies, or in order to save his life.
It because of Sarah?
Because the incident with Sarah.
Yes, okay. When he says that's my sister, not my wife.
Exactly.
Okay.
So basically, Abraham is traveling with his wife, Sarah. Mm-hmm. And Sarah's given this phenomenal beauty. Like, she's so extremely gorgeous, the narration state, that she's given something like 2/3 or half of the beauty of all people on earth.
Okay, wow.
She's like the female version of Joseph, right? In her time. She's actually pretty much one of the reasons why Joseph ends up, because he's her grandson, end up coming out so handsome, is because of the beauty that Sarah had.
Wow.
And so Sarah is traveling with Abraham. Then back in the day, there's no police. It's kind of like the wild, wild west. It's dangerous. There was a lot of robbers. There was a lot of mercenaries that are just kind of waiting on the roads to attack people and rob people and take what it is that they want. Abraham's traveling with Sarah. He doesn't have an army with him. He doesn't have a nation. He just has some servants, and he is stopped twice, okay? And twice he's confronted about Sarah. Once is in Egypt, okay? And that's by some of the Egyptian men who find Sarah, and they find her extremely attractive. And so they decide that they're going to go back and inform the Pharaoh. Pharaoh gets word that there's this beautiful woman that nobody has seen the likes of her beauty ever. And he summons Abraham. And he asks him, who is she? Abraham is worried that if he says, I'm her husband, that Pharaoh is going to kill him and just take her away. Okay. So then he says, actually, she's my sister. Okay? And so Pharaoh decides to propose to her. And Abraham allows it to happen. Wow. The Bible says, the Torah says, that she is taken into the household of Pharaoh. In the narration states, she's taken into the household of Pharaoh. And in return, Abraham is given all of these extreme riches, right? He becomes rich. He actually makes his fortune. And it's one of the things that a lot of feminists, Jewish feminists, they criticize Abraham for. Because they say that Abraham actually made his fortune out of the fact that he sold his wife while, as property to Pharaoh and accepted these gifts in exchange. Yeah, I can see that's extremely controversial for sure. And so the Pharaoh, he takes her into his household, and the Bible doesn't really state what happens or how far did things get between the Pharaoh and between Sarah. It doesn't have word or mention on whether or not the marriage was consummated or not, just that she was taken into his household. Okay. Then plagues start to strike Pharaoh and his people. They all start getting extremely sick. And Pharaoh puts two and two together, and he realizes that it's because of this woman that came into his household. She's the reason behind all of the misfortunes. Everything was good before we met Sarah. Everything was good before I married her. And now that I'm married to her, there's something not right. So he goes and he talks to her. And he manages to get a confession out of her that actually she is married. And so he puts two and two together, and he realizes that God is striking him with these calamities because he married a married woman. Okay. And so Pharaoh takes Sarah, and he begs Abraham to pray for their cure. And he tells Abraham, he chastises him, basically tells him, why did you do this? Why would you marry your wife to me? And then Abraham says, I was worried you guys were going to kill me. So Pharaoh allows him to keep the riches which he gave as dowry for Sarah. And he also grants to Abraham one of his daughters, and that is Hajar, as a handmaiden. And so he marries to kind of make up for the whole incident. He gives one of his own daughters to Abraham, and Abraham takes her, and they move on. Okay. Wow, that's quite a story. And so this is the mistake of Abraham in the Bible and in the Torah. And in the Quran, can we find the same story? We don't find this same story in the Quran with such detail, but what we do find is we find that there are several verses which highlight, regardless of interpretation, if we're just talking about the apparent view of it, we find that Abraham, at one point, he's questioning whether or not the sun is God, whether or not the moon is God, whether or not the star is God. So we find that Abraham does have a mistake in the Quran, and that is that he's confused at one point in time over who is God, the identity of God, his perfection is limited.
Right.
He doesn't know he's actually committing or possibly committing polytheism at one point with trying to identify who God is.
Okay, yeah. So it's clear that he's not born knowing
Infallible.
everything. Yeah, he's not born infallible.
Yes, and it's clear that he made a mistake.
Yeah.
Although Abraham's mistake, like Noah's and like Adam's, were all personal mistakes. They were not mistakes that misled their nation or changed the rules of God, or that he was going out fighting a prophet or a messenger. Like what he did hurt himself.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right. What about the next Ulil Azm prophet? Let's talk about Moses.
Okay. There are a couple of things that I can think of, but I think probably the biggest one was when he didn't circumcise his son. Because he was on, upon the covenant of Abraham, circumcision was obligatory, and he didn't circumcise his son, and it was clear that that was a mistake, and something bad was happening, right? Something bad was happening to him.
Well, he was on his way. God gives him the commandment in the Bible to go and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. Mm-hmm. And then it states that God was waiting for Moses at this particular area, and that God was going to kill Moses.
Yeah.
And the reason why he was going to kill Moses becomes evident because, the wife of Moses, Zipporah, she goes and she circumcises her son fast, and she throws the foreskin at the feet of Moses in order to make this anger of God go away.
Yeah, yeah. So clearly that was a mistake. That's like an extreme mistake, because Moses is this great prophet and God is going to do amazing things through him. But because he doesn't
tell the people not to circumcise. So he's not misguiding the people. He himself just doesn't circumcise his own son.
It's just his own son.
So it's a personal shortcoming and a personal failure to uphold the law, but in regards to himself.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, that's a clear
and
mistake.
Even his failure was going to lead to his death had it not been corrected.
Yeah, that's really heavy, because look at how important Moses is in Judaism and Christianity and Islam. He's seen as one of the greatest prophets that ever existed. But this mistake, even though it was, as you said, a personal mistake, it was going to lead to him being wiped out. Like, to him, maybe not necessarily not being recorded in history, but for him to have not done the things that he ended up doing.
What is another one of the mistakes of Moses?
He questioned the righteous servant. We spoke previously about the story of the righteous servant. But
even before that, what do we have? We have that Moses, basically when he's 40 years old, the story with the killing of the Egyptian.
Okay.
So basically what happens is that he goes forward. He's called out by some guys. Some guy's like, help me, help me, help me. He goes to see what is the issue. He finds that he is being oppressed by this Egyptian. The man comes to him. Moses is like, why are you calling for my help? He says, you won't believe what this Egyptian guy did to me. And the narrations state that basically what had happened is that the Quran says that Pharaoh and his soldiers were doing two things. So this was what was really bad about Pharaoh and his soldiers. They were slaughtering the sons of the Israelites. Yeah. And the second thing was that they were basically abusing their women.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So this man was complaining to Moses that a soldier of Pharaoh had come inside his house, beat him up, and proceeded to rape his wife in front of his own eyes as he was bound up. And so the man was seeking Moses to take vengeance upon this guy, because clearly he was a believer and Moses is the messenger of God. Mm-hmm. And Moses, when he heard this, he was outraged, and he went towards the Egyptian soldier and he killed him. Mm-hmm. But he killed the Egyptian soldier without it being a command from God. Okay. So it was out of anger. It was out of a moment of rage. So even though the Egyptian deserved it,
it wasn't God's plan.
It wasn't God's plan, and it wasn't God's command. And for that reason, you find verses in the Quran where Moses is repenting to God for having committed this act.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Even though clearly the guy, he deserved it. Clearly he did something very bad, but still Moses had to repent because it was a mistake that he didn't ask God first. He didn't go based on God's will. He went based on Moses' will.
Exactly. And it's highlighted as being a mistake because the Quran continues and it says basically that he was then reapproached by the same man who was asking for his help, and then Moses refuses to help him and basically states that this is all from the devil. And the reason why the guy, just an FYI so that we give you the story in context, what happened after his wife was raped by the Egyptian, in the ancient Hebrew laws, if a man came upon your wife, you can't be with her anymore. So it's not like where you can divorce the woman, she marries somebody else, and then you can remarry her. If once a man and a woman were married in the old Abrahamic Mosaic traditions and laws, if the woman was divorced and she married somebody else, she could never go back to her first husband again. Okay. So once she was raped, him and his wife had this great disagreement because the husband said, "Now I can never touch you again." And the wife was flipping out. She was extremely angry. She said, "This was not my fault that I was raped. How could you dare dishonor me like this and refuse to touch me anymore and make me out in front of my family and my kinsfolk as being a person who was not loyal?" And they begin to argue with one another. She goes back to her family. She complains to them. She narrates to them what happens. She's blaming her husband. He couldn't even protect me from the soldier, and now he's blaming me on top of that. Her brothers get extremely angry, and they come down to the house of the husband, and they threaten to kill him, at which point he runs, and then he begins to seek Moses' help in defense of him once again, and Moses this time refuses to defend this guy against the family of the wife.
So clearly he knows he made a mistake.
Yeah, and it was also at this point so it was the family also of the wife that turned to Moses and they say to him, "What are you going to do? Kill us like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" So they're the ones that knew that Moses killed the Egyptian because they heard the story from the husband and from the wife, and it was for that reason that Moses also was filled with fear, and he was worried now that this trap that was set for him by the shaitan was going to become a widespread rumor in all of Egypt, and that he was eventually going to be arrested and killed by Pharaoh for this act of murder. And that's what causes him to leave Egypt at that time and to go seek refuge in Midian. And then it's many years before he comes back. So there's a clear example of the mistake that he does. And there's also many other mistakes that are mentioned, that Moses had done in the narrations of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, and in the Jewish traditions, and also in the Torah. One of them is that Moses he had an extreme temper. So just like he killed this guy out of anger in the Quran, we find an example of his anger in the Torah where he's told by God to speak to the rock, and instead he strikes it out of anger. And because of this act of aggression against the stone, he's forbidden from entering into the promised land. And you know this story, don't you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course, that's clearly a mistake. That's a huge mistake.
Other
huge consequence.
Other mistakes that Moses did was that he asked to see God in the open.
Yeah, he was wondering about the nature of God, like so much. He was questioning the nature of God. Yeah.
He had too many questions about things that were beyond his level. And God took great offense to his constant attempts of peeking behind the veil and, questioning like, okay, well, how and where and why? is God in this way? And until the point came that he asked to see God in the open. Moses takes a group of Israelites, they go up the mountain, and they're struck by lightning, and they all die, and God resurrects them. And Moses, he is repentful in the Quran, in one of the verses, and he seeks forgiveness from God, and then declares himself to be the first of the believers.
Moses' story is actually filled with many mistakes, actually. Yeah,
Moses' story is probably one of the prophets that have the most mistakes mentioned on him. In history, they highlight Moses' mistakes the most, and and I think that's fascinating because Moses was this very prominent and important prophet, and so they cared about the details of Moses the most, and that allowed them to, preserve a lot of the mistakes that Moses did. They would. There's probably many stories of a similar nature from other prophets that weren't recorded because, as you said, Moses is seen as, in Judaism, he's the greatest. He's the greatest of the prophets. They don't take Jesus, so his story is the most prominent obviously in the Torah. He's the one who wrote the 5 books, of the Torah, according to the belief. He's responsible for the 5 books of the Torah. So, Moses is at the heart of Judaism. And so we have then Jesus. He's the next Ulul Azm prophet. God in Christianity, prophet in Islam. And so there's only one place. Okay, because it's really important to kind of look now at the Jesus story. Jesus, he's born in Islam, not in Christianity, but in Islam, he's actually talking in the cradle. The miracle of the miracle of him speaking. He seems to be perfect and to declare himself from the cradle as being a messenger of God. So you'd think, okay, what does this mean? Does this mean that he is infallible from birth? There is no mistakes from the time that he's born that are recorded on him in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam until the age of 33 years old. So all that time period, we don't really have any narrations or any verses that are pointing these mistakes out. He's talking from the cradle. He's going forward and he's performing miracles. He's turning water into wine. He's curing the leper. He's telling people what's stored in their houses. He is raising the dead even. He's walking on water. He
faces off against Iblis himself, offering him all of these things. Exactly. And he's so strong, and his determination is so strong.
So that's really important to mention because when his dawah starts, he's tempted by Satan. Right? In 3 occasions. You want to tell us about those?
Okay. Satan offers him that you're hungry. He's fasting in the desert. He's been fasting for 40 days. By this point, he's obviously hungry. He says, if your God is true, turn this rock into bread. Turn this into bread, and and Jesus is not doing any of what he says. He even takes him to the top of a mountain, and he says, I offer you all of this. I offer you the power. I offer you everything in this world. And again, Jesus isn't tempted. He isn't tempted by anything that he has to offer. Jesus is not fazed at all by his offers.
So Jesus is tempted by the devil and he stands strong. And that's really important because it proves that Jesus is infallible. Satan cannot affect him. Okay? He's stronger than the whispers of the devil. So then where do we find the mistake that Jesus has committed? And the only place that we find in the Gospels that Jesus seemingly makes this mistake is that he doesn't want. This is the only place where his will is going in an opposite direction to the will of God. Mm-hmm. Right? So an infallible, his will should always be aligned with the will of God. Yeah. Right? Like the Quran says, and you do not will except that God wills. Mm-hmm. Right? We find this taking place right before the arrest of Jesus. Yeah. He's praying to God. Yeah. And he's begging God. Yeah. And he's saying to God, let this cup be moved from me. Yeah. I don't want this thing that you have told me is going to happen to me. I don't want to be crucified. Please don't let it happen to me. Yeah. You know? But if it is your will, even though God already said that it was his will. Yeah. You know, so he's questioning the will of God. Then let it be so. I accept it, but please don't let it happen. Yeah. Now, this is a very important point because it becomes clear then that Jesus can't be God. Yeah. This very incident proves that Jesus is a creature. Yeah. And that Jesus is not God, because God does not have multiple personality disorder where he's willing different things, right? Yeah. So clearly Jesus as a creature has a different will and a different idea of what he wants to happen than God does. He
says, let your will be done. Like he does make the stipulation of, but let your will be done, not my will. But please, if you will, lift this cup from me.
That means there's two different people, and there's two different wills.
Yeah. That's true.
So it is at this moment where Jesus becoming a creature or being a creature becomes evident that is Jesus's mistake. And we have to say that even though this is considered to be a mistake for somebody who's at the rank of Jesus, because he was an Ulil Azm prophet and he was pretty extremely perfect. Mm-hmm. It is not a mistake like the rest of the previous prophets and messengers made, right? So it's a much lesser severe mistake than, say, for example, the mistake of Adam. There's no comparison. Here, Adam is breaking the covenant with God and directly disobeying him. Jesus is just saying, please don't let this happen. Okay? Noah is questioning God. Jesus is just asking God, right? Yeah. Abraham, is lying, and maybe he should have been more brave or more firm or more trusting that God would protect him and Sarah, which God did. Abraham failed to do that. Yeah. Jesus, to a much lesser degree, is failing to have absolute trust in God's plan, right? So it's similar to what Abraham did, but much less, because he's asking and he's not doing like Abraham did. Yeah. And his mistake is obviously much less severe than the mistakes that Moses was committing.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so then what about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
What mistake did he make?
Yeah, so Muhammad, he has inherent infallibility according to the Shia. Yeah. Do we find that he has a mistake? Well, we have in the Quran a verse. Yeah. Which, by the way, we have many verses in the Quran, just FYI, that are indicative and point to mistakes of the Prophet. But I'm going to dismiss most of them for the mere fact that there's a very big disagreement between Sunnis and between Shia over who the verses were talking about. So, for example, there's a verse in Surah 80 which says he frowned and turned away. And this is basically God chastising somebody because there was a blind man who came and he had questions about religion, or he wanted to know something, and he interrupts the speech of the prophet and as he's talking to other people. And according to the Sunni narration, the Prophet Muhammad is way more concerned with the rich established Qurayshi people and with giving them dawah than he is this blind man who's poor and has nothing. And so God chastises him for that. The Shia, though, they say impossible. This verse, the people of the house, the very family of the Prophet Muhammad, have stated that this has nothing to do with the Prophet Muhammad. It's because you guys are Nasibis and you guys are trying to take away the rights of the Ahl Bayt and bring down the Prophet's rank, that you're saying it's about the Prophet, but actually it's about the companion of the Prophet, Uthman ibn Affan. So you have verses like this that are pointing towards mistakes of the prophets. If we're talking about Sunni Islam, then even for the Sunnis, the Prophet Muhammad committed many mistakes, right? That should never have been committed. And for the Sunnis, even some of these mistakes are really bad, like very, very bad mistakes, like that one. But for the Shia, no. Muhammad he didn't make any mistakes. There's only this verse in the Quran, which is at the end. It's one of the last verses in the entire Quran, and it states, or one of the last verses to be revealed in the Quran, and it's a verse directed towards the Prophet, and it says, "O you Prophet, inform the people of what has been revealed to you, and if you don't reveal it, then it would be as if you did nothing." Wow. Okay? And this is a very strong worded chastisement to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the interpretation of this verse by the Ahl Bayt is basically that the Prophet Muhammad received the commandment from God at Ghadir to announce that Ali ibn Abi Talib was his successor and his vicegerent. Okay? But he was feeling uncomfortable. He was not wanting to. He had a struggle within his chest. He didn't want to appoint Ali ibn Abi Talib, or rather he was fearful. It's not that he didn't want to appoint him, but he was fearful about the reaction of the people, that they would say, "Oh, look, he's just appointing his family member," and these types of things. So he feared the tongues of the Muslims, you know, and he shouldn't have done that. And so God knew what he was thinking and knew what he had in his heart, and told the Prophet Muhammad that if you don't do as I told you to do, then it would be as if you were not a prophet at all, and actually you would be erased from all prophethood.
I mean, as if you did nothing. That's
of course, as if he did nothing. And the reason is because he wouldn't have safeguarded Islam. So all of Islam would have been wiped away. Yeah. So it would have been lost. All of his work that he would have done would have been for nothing, because if he doesn't point Ali ibn Abi Talib, then the people who usurp the religion after him, false imams, would come and they would change the word, and nobody would have followed Imam Ali, because the Prophet would have never said to follow Imam Ali.
Wow. Wow.
So, but the mistake of Muhammad here that we see,
small.
It is extremely small because
not even on his tongue.
The mistakes that are happening with Adam and them are ones that they're doing. It's choices, actions that they're committing. Jesus, his mistake is just a word that is spoken.
Yeah.
Okay? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's not an action that's done, or it's not a word that's spoken, but rather it's something which is within his own chest.
Wow.
So that would not even be considered to be a mistake with normal people, but for somebody at the rank of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even this in his chest shouldn't have existed. This mere passing by of a thought shouldn't have been there. This struggle shouldn't have been there. And that's why Muhammad continues to be inherently infallible, because he never does or says anything that leads people into misguidance, and he does not make any mistake that is spoken or actions that are done that are mistakes that oppress his own self. And it's just something that's going on within himself. It was a forewarning. God was warning him with this verse so that he doesn't actually speak something or question something.
That's amazing.